As part of a special series this week about the end of life, thousands of you have been on Twitter and in touch on Facebook, and you've been dedicating candles to the memory of a loved one, and we featured some of them just here.
And this morning we've also been running some of your messages and tributes on the big screen outside our studio in Salford, and lighting real candles as well there on the ground, remembering the mums and dads, grandparents, children and friends who you've told us about this week and whose names you've messaged. There are some of them now, they're going round and round.
Some of those tributes, well, to mark the end of the week, Charlie is in Bristol for a special edition of Breakfast. So from John and me, it's goodbye. And Charlie is going to take it away. Morning, Charlie.
Naga, thank you very much. Yes, this is the end of a very special week on Breakfast, where we've been looking at the end of life. Just how well or how badly do people deal with it? Do we talk about it enough? We've come to Bristol Museum this morning. It's rather grand surroundings here because they're holding a special exhibition here. It's Death, the Human Experience, and it very much ties in with the themes that we're trying to address this week about how much we talk about those final days, about bereavement, and whether we're getting any better at talking about loss. So, John Maguire is with me here in Bristol, and he's having a chance to look around the exhibition. We can go to John now, and John, I understand you have a friend with you.
Yeah, morning, Charlie. He's not much of a conversationalist, I must admit. A fiberglass model of a human skeleton. Of course, the skeleton, often the last part of the body that remains after death. This part of the exhibition is called Symbols of Death. It represents all different aspects of different cultures from around the world and different times as well through British culture, British attitudes to death. They're obviously a king vulture. Elsewhere in the exhibition, you can see the death's head hawk moth, an incredible animal, incredible detail on the back of its abdomen, and also a small skeleton of a bat. In very many cultures, and again throughout history, creatures of the night, such as bats, for example, are associated through superstition with death, with the end of life. And here, back in the exhibition here, is a mask worn by plague doctors throughout Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries. Part gas mask, I suppose, part protective, not only to protect their identity, but also, as you can imagine, that would have been quite a frightening thing to see during those times. I'm joined by Professor Tony Walter, who we met earlier on in the week from the University of Bath, the world's first Professor of Death Studies. It's always worth mentioning. We've been fascinated this week, I think, by attitudes to death, and also this business of whether or not people talk about it, whether or not it's a taboo subject. You've got strong feelings on the matter.
Yes, I mean, death is obviously universal. We're all mortal, we're all going to die sometime. But what this exhibition shows brilliantly is how differently different human beings at different times have actually responded to that. And that's partly because death offers different challenges at different times in history, and it's offering some really new challenges now, and I think that underlies why perhaps as individuals, as families, as communities and societies, we need to talk about it. For example, I mean, thankfully, very few of us die of the plague nowadays. In fact, increasingly fewer of us are going to be dying of cancer. More of us are going to be dying in our 80s and 90s of multiple conditions with a degree of dementia. Now, that's a fantastic achievement. We get to that age, but it's going to create all sorts of new issues to deal with about dying and the end of life, which we need to face as individuals, families, and societies. We're moving from a society which was once dominated by kind of Churchillian stoicism. People dealt with life's difficulties by not talking about it for very, very good reason. I mean, if you were fighting in the First World War and your mate next to you got blown to bits, you just packed up your troubles in your old kit bag and smiled, smiled, smiled. You had a war to fight. If you started talking about your emotions, your feelings, you'd be dead too. And that was true of widows in the Blitz, people, you know. And that shaped a whole generation or two's attitudes for how to deal with difficult things. And these are people in their 80s and 90s now dying. But I'm a child of the 60s, and a much more expressive generation, and people so we're caught nowadays between a society that's caught between stoicism and wanting to be more expressive. And that's the challenge many bereaved people find themselves nowadays in.
Okay, Professor Walter, thank you very much indeed. More from you later on with Charlie, I know. I just wanted to leave you, Charlie, with the words of the great American author Mark Twain. He says here, "I do not fear death. I'd been dead for billions and billions of years before I was born and had not suffered the slightest inconvenience from it." The words of Mark Twain. Charlie, back to you.
John, thank you very much. Well, as you may have seen earlier, we have a gathering of many people, very quiet right now, but I can tell you there's been very lively conversations as people have been sharing their experiences and stories. So let's introduce you to two of them straight away now. We have Zalika Sutherland and Tony Bronser with me now. Very good morning to both.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It is an opportunity this week on Breakfast. We've been very much trying to open up the idea of people having conversations about end of life. And Zalika, I know this is something, it's a passion for you, isn't it?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the Death Cafe, which you're involved in.
Well, just to let people know what Death Cafe is, what tends to happen is people meet, they eat cake, they drink tea, and they discuss death. And the objective is to increase our awareness of death with a view to helping us make the most of life. And although entitled Death Cafe, it's important to appreciate they are very much about embracing life and helping us to realise that death can be both a warm and beautiful experience for those facing it and those left behind.
What was your inspiration? Because people were thinking, why would you want to be doing that? What was your inspiration for getting involved in that?
Well, when my nan died when I was 15, she dropped down dead at a wedding.
It's a family wedding and your grandmother actually...
Yeah, a family friend wedding.
Okay.
And as a result of that, I set up Your White Room, which specialises in final farewell event planning. So I organise unique funeral receptions and work with people facing end of life to create special goodbyes for their loved ones. What I realised when my nan died was that when someone dies without having these conversations, those left behind, everyone has an opinion, but nobody actually knows. And it's those conflicting opinions fueled by love and passion to do the right thing, which makes it even a harder experience.
So, Tony, you're from the National Council for Palliative Care.
Yes.
I just want to... You're hearing what Zalika's saying there about those conversations.
Yes.
Does that resonate with you?
Absolutely. It's at the heart of everything we do. And one of the other organisations that's an offshoot of us is the Dying Matters Coalition. And we really want to get the conversation out into the open. We want to get people talking about, let's be honest, something that's going to happen to all of us. And we feel that by talking about it, it takes some of the mythology away, and it's also a tremendous support to people who are going through the end of their own lives and to those who are bereaved.
And why do you think there is that reluctance to start the conversation at any point? Where do you think that comes from? Is it something to do with the British psyche? Are we not as good as elsewhere? Zalika, you are nodding there. Where do you see that?
Well, I think as a society, we're very much take the approach, we don't want to talk about it until it's right in front of us. And I think that if we were more open about having these conversations, it would leave way for us to have a better experience of grief, a better experience of bereavement, and a better experience of how we move forward with remembering those that are very important to us.
Do you see, Tony, generational differences in the way that people approach death, end of life?
Yes, I do, definitely. And it's not purely a British phenomenon. I had the privilege to go over and do some bereavement work in America the summer before last. And the teenagers there, when somebody mentioned death, put their hands over their ears and said, don't use that word. And there is a generational thing about it, because young people and middle-aged people feel that it's a long way away, and talking about it somehow brings the horizon closer, which is something they don't want. And yet young people do die, and middle-aged people do die. My own son died at age 35, and it's something we do need to talk about.
Thank you both very much for sharing your experience for us now. We're going to move across and talk to some more of our guests this morning. Introduce you to Adam Heath, nearest to me here. Very good morning to you from the National Association of Funeral Directors. Charlie Phillips as well. Good morning, Charlie.
Good morning.
Charlie's a photographer who specialises in taking pictures of funerals and rituals around funerals.
Mostly the Afro-Caribbean diaspora.
Yeah. So, I mean, what have you learned? What do you see and what have you learned about those rituals?
Well, from the Afro-Caribbean diaspora, we look at funerals as celebrating someone's life. To us, funerals is a celebration, not just about death, but a celebration of someone's life, past life. So this is why you find Afro-Caribbean funerals is, it's taken off so big. Yeah, it's one of the biggest events. It can also be a social event as well, but over the years, some of the traditions are dying out because they become very modernized. Now, the reason the title of my last book was Our Great Thou Art. Our Great Thou Art was a traditional spiritual song for mostly Africa. Bless my soul, we are to do. How great thou art, how great thou art, yeah? And now
Judge, can I just say, as we're talking now, we're seeing some of the pictures you've taken.
Yes, yes.
And maybe you tell us a little bit about them, because some of the imagery will be new to people who haven't possibly seen, you know, funerals like
Well, we
this.
start with photograph number 1, you know. Sometimes at the beginning of the procession, we can have African drumming, or if not, you can have a jazz band as well. And now it's gone up markets, you can have chamber music, the real upmarket Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean funerals, yeah? So our funerals can last for a day and 2 days as well, yeah? But sometimes at the graveside it turns into a picnic where people bring their own lunch and they celebrate after.
It's very interesting, Charlie.
It's a party effect.
Yeah, can I just ask Adam, I mean, you're a funeral director here in the UK. Now, it's interesting hearing about different cultures and the attitude to that end-of-life moment.
This is resonating with me, that the pictures are superb, and nowadays we do more and more sophisticated funerals with different involvement of different vehicles, different people involved in it, dove release, we do African drummers as well. We do all sorts of, everybody wants more and more out of a funeral nowadays. It's not just 10 minutes at the creme with the duty minister, it's a celebration of life, and we do it. And we do more and more for families, and we try and help them.
Earlier in the series on Breakfast this week, we were talking about the costs of funerals and issues around that, and that's a reality, isn't it? There is a reality check there about you know, what those experiences can be like.
The cost of funerals is an issue, but people want more and more out of a funeral, and sadly that will cost more. If you want a horse-drawn hearse, it can cost quite a lot more money for the horse-drawn hearse and time and trouble. So it can all add up, but families will know how much the funeral's going to cost before they leave and after the end of the interview, before they actually commit to doing this.
Thank you very much to both of you, and Charlie, thank you for sharing your pictures
for
us as well this morning. I just want to tell you about the BBC Action Line that we have in place. If you touch upon any of the subjects we're talking about this morning, and so many people will be, of course, the BBC Action Line support number is 08000 566 424. That's 08000 566 424. Lots of information there about bereavement counselling and about all issues related to end of life. So do use those numbers if you feel you need to. We're going to talk to lots more people here about their experiences now, but let's have a look at the weather now with Alex.
Thanks very much, Charlie. Good morning to you. It's a little bit colder out there this morning compared to many mornings this week. It's also a little bit brighter, with many of us seeing some sunshine around. So this scene taken this morning in Bournemouth, for example. We are going to see the winds picking up, though, today, and they're going to get quite lively, particularly tonight and tomorrow, all from this area of low pressure, intensifying as it moves towards us. Now, it does look as if the low itself will go to the north of the UK, but look at the number of isobars. When the isobars squidge together like that, that's when the winds really pick up. Not a major problem this morning, though. In fact, it's just a pleasant Friday morning generally. You will notice the difference across these southern areas where for many mornings this week we've been at 12 or 13 degrees, just single figures in some places. So it is a little colder, but we do have some sunshine across much of England and Wales. A few showers scattered about, particularly over northwest England, 1 or 2 across Scotland. Most of southern and eastern Scotland, Northern Ireland starting dry. That weather system is starting to arrive in the far northwest. It's going to be a wet day over the Highlands, the Western Isles of Scotland. Elsewhere, though, apart from a few scattered showers, many places dry. The sunshine, though, will turn rather hazy as the cloud tends to spill in and the breeze starts to pick up. But overall, it's a fine day with temperatures still above average for most of us. Double digits, we could reach 13 or 14 degrees Celsius across the southeast. But it is all about the winds picking up, getting very strong this evening and overnight across Scotland. Potentially could cause some problems with gusts in the Western Isles, maybe 80 miles an hour. And inland across Scotland, gusts of 50 or 60 miles an hour are possible. Those sort of winds could cause some problems, some travel disruption. So stay across the forecast. BBC Local Radio will have more. The rain also set to become a problem as it sets in across southwest Scotland, northwest England and Northern Ireland and lasts for most of tomorrow. It's windy wherever you are tomorrow. The strongest gusts tomorrow likely over northeast England and southeast Scotland. And again, they could cause some problems. Further south, it's generally a dry day, but it will be blustery. On Sunday, the winds are easing down. Outbreaks of rain across the south, showers in the north, but for many in between, something a bit brighter. Lots going on this weekend. Keep across the forecast with those warnings in force on the BBC Weather website. That's all for now, though. It's back to Charlie in Bristol.
Alex, thank you so much. Welcome back to Bristol Museum. This morning they're hosting a special exhibition here. It's about death, essentially. It ties in with a theme across breakfast all this week about the end-of-life experience. We're sharing people's stories, some uplifting, of course, some very sad today. John's been having a look round the exhibition for us, and we go to him now.
Yeah, Charlie, some of the exhibits are exotic, some of them are extraordinary, some of them very normal, really, very part of everyday life, and therefore, as families have wanted part of everyday death. These are called grave goods, the types of item that people will often place inside a coffin or a casket. There's a regimental cap badge, there's a bottle of beer, and these wonderful dancing shoes here belonging to a lady who was obviously a very keen dancer in her time. Her family wanted them to go with her. They said she waltzed her way through the last years of her life, and if she took those onwards, then perhaps she could teach the angels to sing. Also, a packet of mint imperials there elsewhere in the exhibit. So some of the physical items that are left behind, but increasingly, as we live much of our life online in the digital world, we perhaps can leave other things behind, music, photographs, blogs and emails. So what happens to those? It's now an area of law that's interesting many solicitors. Writing a will now needs to consider perhaps sometimes what happens in cyberspace.
It's 11 months since Ian died from a brain tumour. He was 33. Ian and Caroline met at school. Their time together as a couple was filled with travel, adventure and hopes for their life together. But when he died, Caroline faced a future that was uncertain and unexpected.
You think you're quite computer savvy or internet savvy and you think you know what you're doing, and then suddenly when you're faced with somebody else's kind of legacy online, you realise there's no rules, you can't find out where it's written, you panic that you don't own any of it and someone's going to shut stuff down and you lose all that content and you lose photos and you just don't know what to do.
As more aspects of our lives, from money to music to memories, go online, then what happens after our death?
I would say this is an area of law which is evolving, and many solicitors are still getting to grips with it themselves.
Caroline's meeting Gary Rycroft, a solicitor and expert on our digital legacy.
I think a little planning can go a long way. We want people to live their lives, we don't want them to obsess about death, but your digital life is something that's only just recently started to crop up. And the problem with it is, if it's lived online, there isn't anything physical there. There isn't anything physical for those left behind to find. So they really need a kind of roadmap to steer them in the right direction.
A will and a hard copy of digital details, no passwords of course, could help those left behind. Loved ones already dealing with such a major personal change in the midst of an ever-changing world.
Yes, we're going to pick up on some of those issues raised in John's film there with our next two guests. Dr. Elaine Casket, a psychologist researching particularly in the area of the digital afterlife, it's called. Also, Zoe Clark-Coates is here as well. So, first of all, Doctor, just pick up on those issues around what we own. We heard a story of Caroline there. You know, the real fear of what was hers and what was not, of a life led together.
Absolutely. I mean, the really significant thing to remember about the time that we're living in is that so many of our memories, our communications, our photographs, they're digitally stored. We don't have any more shoeboxes in the attic with physical things, and so that means that when we when we lose somebody, we come to worry a lot. There's a lot of anxiety about what's going to happen with our access to those memories. We come to rely on them 24/7. We come to rely on being able to tap into our friend's social networking profile 24/7. And then what if somebody else comes along and removes that social networking profile, the next of kin, for example?
Yeah, and people sharing their experiences here those images and that life is so important as part of the bereavement process of handling what can be very, very traumatic.
The digital things that we leave behind are becoming a really important way for us in the contemporary age of continuing to connect with people who've died. And so there's a tremendous re-traumatizing effect if that information goes away. So one of the things people need to be aware of, if they're next of kin or if they have the power to remove a Facebook profile of somebody that they have lost, is there are a lot of other mourners out there who might be relying on that profile to connect with their memories.
Let me bring in Zoe. Just tell us a little bit about your own experience and why you set up an internet-based help agency. Tell us a little bit about your own experience.
So sadly we've lost 5 babies ourselves, and we lost 3 children prior to having our little girl who's now 6, and then we lost another 2 children before having our next daughter.
Can I just say, I mean, people immediately on hearing that will be thinking you have been through such an extraordinary ordeal.
Yeah, I mean we have been through a lot, but we've also now turned it into something amazingly positive, which can help so many people. So we started the Mariposa Trust, which is more commonly known as sayinggoodbye.org, and that supports anybody who's lost a baby, whether that be through miscarriage, through stillbirth, or in early years. And the amount of support that's needed is huge. I mean, our website has over 650,000 hits a month, and we support around 50,000 people a month.
And what are the most common themes? I mean, you've lived through this yourself, and you're hearing what's happening to other people. What are the most common themes about trying to deal with what's happened?
Often isolation. People don't want to talk about it. People don't know how to talk about it, especially with baby loss. People find it a very taboo subject. And especially if you lose in miscarriage, because there's a 12-week rule, don't tell anybody you're pregnant until after the 12 weeks. That sort of reinforces don't speak about it.
And I'm just thinking, I mean, one of the things we're very much trying to emphasise this week is about, if you like, the positives and you know, what good can come out of what is undoubtedly a desperate situation. When you think about it that way, what are the positive things that can come out of what people have been through?
I think what can come out of it is an appreciation of life. That certainly happened for me and my husband when we started the organisation. That was because we were able to turn a lot of our grief into something positive, where the depth of pain we've experienced and that trauma now makes us experience life wholly. We appreciate everything.
It's really interesting, isn't it, Elaine, hearing that notion of people, and many people here today watching this will have experienced a loss of some kind, and that notion of grabbing life as a result of being gone through that experience.
Absolutely. And my main area of research into Facebook and mourning memorialization, there can be really rich representations of that life, of a person's life that is stored online. And the facility of the internet to be able to store those for what feels like an indefinite period of time is actually a really valuable one. It's a valuable way of connecting, and that's very important to remember for facilitating people's bereavement and grief.
Elaine, Zoe, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. Thank you very much. We'll have more in just a few minutes from here at Bristol Museum. Right now, though, the news, weather and travel where you are. Welcome back to Bristol Museum this morning. Brought the sofa down here. They're hosting a special exhibition which is all about death. And it's a subject we've been investigating this week throughout breakfast. It's about end of life, whether we talk about it enough and whether we can talk about it in a healthy way as opposed to a negative way. John's been having a look around the exhibition for us, and we can get to him now.
Thanks, Charlie. This part concerns funerals, mourning, what happens after death. You can see some of the colourful costumes from different cultures, different parts of the world, and then also perhaps some of the more sombre approaches. This, a Victorian wedding dress, famously worn, of course, by, not this particular one, but famously worn by Queen Victoria. It was traditional for women in mourning to wear them for 2 years. They could only wear jewellery after a year. As you come to the end of the exhibition here, you're led to reflect, to contemplate, and also to remember people who've passed. There is a special quiet area here where people can sit surrounded by virtual candles, a very quiet, considered place where they can write notes to place in a basket, and they will therefore be notes that they've written to remember loved ones. In Scotland, it's the only part of the UK where a special festival takes place. It's called Two Absent Friends. Our Scotland correspondent, Lorna Gordon, has been along to find out what happens there.
Through music and song, poetry and verse, they've come together to remember.
I loved her. I missed her.
The things people are saying, the stories they're telling, would make me think of my granddad who passed away. It's not like making me feel upset about it, it's making me think of the happy things and the good things that he brought.
If it weren't for sadness.
For some, the act of remembrance is personal, private. Those here think sharing memories gives support to those who are left behind.
The idea is that if we provide opportunities for people to remember people in ways that are appropriate, then it makes it easier for them perhaps to feel less isolated about the people that they've lost.
Myra Crow's 15-year-old son Andrew passed away 5 years ago. This concert on the anniversary of his death is a chance to honour him and remember the happy times they had.
Andrew once wrote that tough times should be faced with cheerfulness, and I'm just following his words. To me, it's an opportunity to openly remember my son.
So the memories never fade, but days like this can help with carrying the burden of loss.
Yes, we're going to pick up on the notion of friends. That's what that film was all about. With two more guests now. Rosa Harris-Edmonds is with us. Very good morning to you, Rosa. We'll talk to you in just a second. But Roy Cumner is here with me as well this morning. Morning to you, Roy.
Morning.
You very kindly brought in some images for us, so maybe it'll help people to understand a little bit of your story if we hold up some of those pictures here. Roy, tell us about your wife. This is Doreen.
Well, we were married for about 60-odd years altogether. It started when I did national service and went on from there.
When did you lose Doreen? How long ago now?
About just over 2 years ago now.
Okay, now many people have been talking to us about the importance of pictures, of images.
Yeah.
And this, just tell us a little bit about this picture.
That was a picture taken on a cruise we went on with my brother and his wife on the Canberra. We went across the Atlantic and around the Mediterranean. It was very good. We really enjoyed ourselves.
And now, as you look back on these images, we've got another picture here. I mean, does it give you a great deal of comfort?
Yes and no.
Just explain that for us.
I remember how good it was and how it's not happening anymore. So I do just miss her a lot. It's just.
I think a lot of people will absolutely empathise with the notion you said there, which is that the very things that you, when you feel closest to, also bring sadness.
Yeah, very much so. But I don't think there's not any alternative as far as I know. I've asked a number of people and I can't find any answer.
Rosa, let me bring you in. Rosa Harris-Edmonds. Rosa, you lost your brother.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about him. How old was he?
He was 22 and he died in a road traffic accident when he was travelling in Vietnam, and that was in 2011.
Okay, now your family has taken a really interesting approach to his loss, and we can hear now from your mum. This is Jane, because Jane, your mum, and Jimmy, your dad, have been on an extraordinary trip. They've gone across America and they're asking people about how they've been dealing with death. They're trying to learn from their experience, and we can just hear a little bit from her now.
I'm here in Mexico, in Oaxaca, because we're actually trying to find out how different cultures manage grief and loss, and we ourselves are bereaved parents. Our son Josh died nearly 5 years ago, in actual fact. Since then we've been working on a variety of projects to look at how our culture manages or maybe doesn't manage grief and death. It's such a difficult thing in our culture to talk about, and we found that in Mexico people seem really comfortable with it. We've travelled from New York to San Francisco interviewing bereaved families and siblings en route. And those families and sibling stories have been remarkable, absolutely remarkable. It's been fascinating for us to hear other people's stories, but our primary objective is, I suppose, to share with people, to create more comfort around how people respond to the bereaved, not to fear us, to get more comfortable with death and loss.
So, Rosa, we just heard from your mum there. What's really interesting, there are no rights and wrongs, are there? And the way your family has approached this is that you've really kept your brother's memory alive. You've very kindly brought in some postcards Just tell us about these, because it's very interesting.
One of his really good friends from school started this, and it's called Postcards to Josh. Because he died when he was travelling, she had the idea that, you know, he could carry on travelling through us. So we get maybe 1 or 2 of these postcards written to him a
So
month.
just to be clear, since his death, his friends have carried on communicating with the family, but they're written to Josh.
But to him, they're to him.
To share what they're doing, as if he were still alive.
To keep him.
And how does that help you and the family, do you think?
Oh, it's just really nice. It's really nice to hear from them and to see that, you know, people are still thinking about him, and that, it's just really nice that everyone's around the world thinking about him.
Roy, thank you so much for sharing your experience for us. Rosa, thank you as well. We're talking to so many people this morning. I'm just going to move across and turn around to talk to my next guest. Very good morning to you. Thank you for waiting so long to talk to us. It's Linda Magistris and Helen Bailey. Very good morning to you both. You have a shared experience in a way, don't you? First of all, just explain what happened. What were your circumstances?
Yes, I think we both lost our partners. I lost my partner about a year ago. He had a very rare soft tissue sarcoma, which is a cancer, which unfortunately was misdiagnosed for a year. But basically, it's the after effect of it all. It's the bereavement that I think we both join in, that we don't get supported. And I certainly wasn't. And
so this moment in time, you lost your partner, and that feeling of loneliness. There's no one there to help you.
Yeah, and what is so strange in the UK at the moment is that we don't seem to recognise bereavement as a really debilitating, really serious condition. GPs and hospitals and hospices, I mean, I was never contacted by the hospital or the GP to see how I was, and I only found by mistake, we both did, an organisation called Widowed and Young, which is widowedandyoung.org.uk, which is the most incredible charity.
Well, and we're very keen all this week to talk about people's experiences, and we're embracing the fact that these are desperately sad situations, but I know you particularly have found humour and amongst what can otherwise be a very grim situation.
Well, that's right. My husband died in an accident in Barbados in February 2011. And when I got back to the UK, I tried to write about it. I'm a professional writer, and I just found I was completely and utterly blocked with grief. I had total writer's block. So about 4 months after he died, I started a blog called Planet Grief, and I started writing about the little things that are huge in bereavement. So the loneliness of buying a single Scotch egg, putting the wheelie bins out and things like that. And it was interesting because when the blog eventually became public, one of the things that came back were other widows and widowers sharing their story and saying, I'm not actually mad. You know, I was doing things like still setting a place at the table, still stacking the dishwasher exactly as he would like it, even though it doesn't suit me.
And it's such a theme. We've heard so many people say that, about that shared experience, that notion you're not the only one, and that other people out there will be experiencing similar things. Doesn't make it any... Well, maybe it does make it easier, actually.
To share, exactly. That's what we're all. Exactly. That's what we're trying to do, is to link up with other people, and that seems to be for us certainly losing a partner, particularly. If you can literally speak to someone who's gone through exactly the same experience, that seems to be the only comfort, and that's where you get your safety from.
I think Linda's right. There's strength in solidarity, and you know, we're coming up to Christmas, and Christmas is a really difficult time for many people. But I remember going to the crematorium on Christmas Day on my own, feeling absolutely appalling. And as I walked the dog around the gravesides, people started coming in to put flowers on graves, to hang balloons off memorials. And you know, Charlie, it was just that feeling that I wasn't going to be the only person sitting at Christmas lunch with someone missing. And it gave me a nub of comfort. It really did.
I would so love to talk more.
We could talk for a long time.
I know you shared a lot of experience.
It's a really big subject.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you
for sharing everything with us this morning. Bristol Museum has been our home for the morning. The sofa has been here as well, and Professor Tony Walter is here with me now. We saw you right at the beginning of the morning this morning. Tony, just give us a sense of what you think you've learned from listening to people's experiences.
Well, people's experiences are immensely diverse. I think one thing that really does strike me is that a lot of the people who are raising this issue nowadays tend to be younger people. It's when somebody dies out of time. And that's fantastic. What I might call the death entrepreneurs. These are people very often who've had these kinds of out-of-time experiences of death and loss. But of course, most of us are actually going to die in old age. And that, I think, is where a lot of the really big challenges are.
Tony, thank you so much. And thank you to all our guests this morning for sharing all their experiences with us. It's been a very interesting week on Breakfast this week, in some ways very uplifting and very moving as well. We're going to leave you now with the images of the week. These are the candles you have lit in remembrance of your loved ones.